She hit my baby across the face during Christmas dinner. The slap split the air in the dining room, sharp enough that even the ring light's lobe was cut out for half a second. My son's wail collapsed into a stunned silence, but nobody turned toward him. Not my sister. Not my parents. Their eyes stayed fixed on me, waiting for the routine to start, me apologizing, me folding in on myself, me being the one who was overreacting. I stayed perfectly still, but someone else moved. My husband slid his chair back, slow, measured, the kind of motion that shifts the entire atmosphere before anyone speaks. He locked eyes with her and said, quietly, "Get out." By then I had already been preparing for this in silence, bartering that quiet for the rest of my life. Stay, I told myself, and later you can decide whether you were right or wrong. I learned how to erase myself long, before I even understood the word for it. At 10, I used to stand at the far end of my grandparents' dining room, next to an old wooden chair with a worn-out seat. Everyone called it the extra chair. I knew it as mine. From that spot, I watched my sister, Marlene, 2 years older, louder, already treated like a walking spotlight, get placed in the middle of every family picture. My mother, Evelyn, would smooth Marlene's hair, tip her chin up, and say, "They're perfect." If I tried to step forward, she'd steer me back with a gentle hand and a rehearsed smile. "Let your sister shine." My father, Harold, never objected. He'd just fiddle with the camera settings, acting like he didn't notice me lingering at the edge, acting like he didn't hear the scrape of that solitary chair when I sat down again. The pattern didn't begin there, but that's the first place I remember feeling it sink into my bones. When I came home with a school award, Marlene accidentally spilled juice over the certificate. Mom rushed to soothe her instead of checking whether I was upset. "She didn't mean it," Mom said. "You know your sister is sensitive." Sensitive. I heard that word more often than I heard my own name. Anytime I paused, questioned something, or simply existed at the wrong moment, Mom would murmur it like a diagnosis that excused everyone else's behavior. Dad's part was a calm, constant neutrality. "Don't make this bigger than it is," he'd murmur. That line followed me through childhood the way my shadow did. Close, inescapable, flattening. As teenagers, the distance between us grew. When Marlene wanted concert tickets, I was told to hand over the money I'd earned from babysitting. "You're good with planning," Mom said, as though responsibility were some natural resource I owed the family. When I needed a ride for a school project, they forgot twice. The third time, Dad just said, "Ask your sister," even though she had already gone out with friends. When I turned 18, I imagined adulthood would break the pattern. It didn't. At holiday dinners, Marlene's stories dominated the table. If I started speaking, someone cut me off. If I disagreed with anything, the room went rigid. "Joy, you're reading too much into things," Mom would say. And there it was again, my signal to swallow my words before the whole table turned on me. Years went by. I moved out, built my own life, my own routines. But the old programming stayed lodged inside me. Step back. Soften. Don't disrupt the balance that keeps everyone else comfortable, but you. I didn't really grasp what that silence was costing me until Rowan was born. When my baby cried and Marlene snapped at me for overreacting, something tiny cracked inside. Something ancient, shaped exactly like that faded wooden chair. It didn't shatter yet, but it shifted enough for me to finally notice it. Looking back, I can pinpoint the night the pattern hardened. I was standing behind the camera flashes when Mom turned to me and said, "Joy, stop being so sensitive." That was the moment I learned exactly where I ranked in this family. The house felt muted after Christmas dinner, the kind of quiet that isn't soothing, just dense and heavy. I stood in the hallway, rocking Rowan, feeling the gentle rise and fall of his breathing against my shoulder. The red mark on his cheek had faded a little, but it was still there, faint and accusatory in the warm lamplight. Footsteps approached behind me, slow and self-assured. I didn't have to turn around to know it was Marlene. She stopped a few feet away, arms folded, her voice already shaped into that careful tone she used when she wanted to win without appearing cruel. "You caused a scene," she said. "Honestly, Joy, you're overreacting again." Again. The word hit me like an old bruise being pressed. I stayed silent. I shifted Rowan in my arms, placed my palm flat against his back, and let that small motion steady me. In our family, silence usually signaled the end of an argument because silence meant giving in. She waited for that, the way she always did. When I didn't give her what she expected, she exhaled dramatically, as if I were inconveniencing her. You know, Mom agrees with me, she added. She says you're too emotional to be taken seriously. My throat tightened, but my face stayed neutral. Years of training. Marlene stepped closer and lowered her voice. If you want this family to stay normal, Joy, stop turning everything into drama. You embarrassed us. Us. As though I lived on the far side of a door they kept shutting in my face. I shifted my stance, feeling the wall press against my shoulder blade. The wallpaper carried a faint cinnamon scent from the holiday candles. For a moment, I just listened to the distant clink of dishes, a laugh drifting from the dining room, Rowan's slow, even exhale. Everything else in me felt sharp and thin. I finally met her eyes, not with rage, not with fear, but with something simpler, clarity. Quiet, cold, clean. She blinked, thrown off by the absence of my usual collapse. You heard me right, she asked. I heard you, I said, my voice steady. Something flickered across her face. She didn't understand why my quiet sounded different this time. She only understood that it wasn't bending. When I walked away, she stayed where she was. She had no idea that the moment she labeled me dramatic, the script they drafted for me my entire life had begun to unravel. I didn't explode. I didn't lose control. I just stopped making myself smaller. And that was the start of everything that followed. I didn't leave their house in a rage. I walked out with Rowan bundled against my chest, his breath warming the fabric while the cold air closed in around us, as if the night itself wanted to keep me awake. Marcus walked a step ahead, the diaper bag in one hand, his other hand hovering near the small of my back. Not quite touching, just attuned. He said nothing. He didn't have to. The quiet between us wasn't avoidance. It was awareness. Once we got home, I laid Rowan in his crib. His tiny fist opened and curled shut as he drifted to sleep, oblivious to the storm he'd absorbed. I watched his chest rise and fall, then stepped back into the dimmer hallway light. My fingers brushed the bracelet on my wrist, an old habit, and something inside me slid into alignment. I didn't cry. I didn't rant. I didn't replay the slap in endless loops. I acted. In the living room, the lamp washed the coffee table in a soft glow. I set my phone down, unlocked it, and opened a new note. My thumbs hovered a moment before I typed the first line. December 25th, 7:14 p.m. Rowan slapped. Then I filled in the details, the angle of the ring light, how far the chair was from the table, the moment my son's crying stopped. The words showed up on the screen clean and precise, like cutting a straight seam through cloth. When that entry was done, I opened my camera roll and scrolled to the picture I'd snapped in the hallway. Rowan's cheek, the faint red shape on his skin, the soft light tracing its outline. I saved it into a folder labeled Rowan, Health Notes. What drove me wasn't fury, it was accuracy. Next, I opened the family group chat and captured screenshots of everything relevant. My mother's dismissive text from last month. Marlene's messages about filming content. Evelyn telling me not to kill the vibe with my worries. Each screenshot went into its own clearly labeled folder. After that, I pulled up the spreadsheet I used to manage our household. I added a new tab, Timeline, another, Witness Observations, another, Communication Logs. My fingers sped up as the framework formed beneath them. I tucked my legs under me on the couch, leaned forward, and adjusted the blanket hanging off the armrest. The house was silent except for the light tapping of keys and the low hum of the heater. Marcus came in, paused behind me, and set a warm mug of tea by my elbow. He didn't ask what I was working on. He saw the folders, the screenshots, Rowan's photo. All he said was, "Take your time." Then he stepped away again, making room for me to keep going. I didn't need anyone's approval. I needed to see things clearly. I created a document compiling every medical note since Rowan's birth. Temperatures, pediatric visits, feeding patterns. Not to use them as weapons, but to shield him. to present the truth without raising my voice, to build something solid enough that no one could dismiss it as overreacting. The clock eased past midnight. I kept typing. At one point, I opened our billing folder, payments, receipts, the usual paperwork of adulthood. I scanned through the files, noting dates, cross-referencing them with conversations, lining up patterns I'd ignored out of habit. Not because those details directly explain what happened that night, but because they revealed something deeper. I had been doing the emotional and logistical heavy lifting for this family for years while being treated like an extra in my own life. I drew the laptop closer and added one last tab, labeled simply Recommendations. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't vengeful. It was a list of next steps for Rowan's care, for communication boundaries, for safety, for truth. Then came the hardest part, sending the email. I drafted it slowly, silently reading each sentence in my head. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a threat. It was a record, neutral, measured, factual. I addressed it to a legal advisor I'd spoken to once before during a difficult maternity leave dispute. I attached the folders, the timeline, the images. My cursor hovered over send. I drew one long, quiet breath and clicked. The soft whoosh of the email leaving my outbox sounded like a door easing shut. Not dramatic, just final. Marcus reappeared, leaning against the doorway. "You sure?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "I'm done being the only one who remembers what actually happened." I stood up and stretched, noticing the ache in my shoulders for the first time. The living room looked unchanged. Lamp, couch, toys piled in a basket, but the air felt different, like walking into a room that had just been cleared of something you couldn't see. I went to Rowan's crib and laid my hand gently on his back, feeling the steady beat of his breathing. His innocence felt heavier now, not because it suddenly needed protection, but because I finally understood what true protection meant. Strength doesn't always come in raised voices. Sometimes it shows up as records kept. Sometimes it shows up as silence. And standing there watching my son, I knew one thing without a shred of doubt. This time, I wasn't going to repair what they had broken. The house looked altered when we went back a few days later. Not festive, not welcoming, just dim. The leftover Christmas lights in the window blinked unevenly, as if they were exhausted from pretending. We were there because my mother had demanded a family discussion. Her voice on the phone had been tight, defensive. She hadn't asked once how Rowan was. Marcus carried Rowan in his car seat, setting it gently down near the doorway. I kept my coat on. The air in the dining room still held a trace of cinnamon and something faintly metallic. The ring light from Christmas dinner lay on the floor unplugged, its legs splayed like a collapsed tripod. Marlene was already seated at the table, arms folded, her expression carefully arranged somewhere between outrage and innocence. My mother hovered behind her, as though she were shielding her from an accusation no one had voiced yet. My father adjusted a chair, but didn't sit, watching Marcus with a new wariness I hadn't seen before. "Joy," Mom began, "we all think you misunderstood what happened." The familiar opening line, the script I'd been reciting my whole life. Before I could respond, Marlene cut in. "You made everything worse by sending that email. You blindsided us." I looked at her, then at the table, the same table where my baby had been hit, the same one where the silence had drowned out his crying. Marcus stayed standing. He set both hands on the back of a chair, the tension in his arms controlled, contained. "We're here so everyone can hear the truth," he said evenly. Mom scoffed. "The truth?" "Joy as always." She stopped when Marcus straightened up fully. He wasn't the kind of man who relied on volume. He relied on presence. And right then, his presence made the room feel smaller. I reached into my bag and placed a slim folder on the table. No theatrics, just paper, photos, timelines, screenshots, notes, everything neat, ordered, detached. My father frowned. "What is all this?" "Documentation," I answered quietly, "since none of you looked at him that night." Marlene rolled her eyes. "You're blowing this out of." Marcus cut across her, his voice calm but edged. "She slapped an infant." Those words landed heavier than the folder itself. A hush spread through the room. I opened to the first page. A picture of Rowan's cheek, the faint mark visible beneath the hallway light. This was taken 10 minutes after dinner, I said. I sent it to a pediatric specialist. Her assessment is attached. My mother's face tightened. Joy, you didn't have to escalate it this far. I didn't, I said. The system did. I slid another page forward. My notes from the risk assessment, the advisor's guidance, the record that now existed beyond the family's control. This isn't about punishing anyone, I said. It's about keeping my child safe. Marlene's chair scraped loudly against the floor. You're making me look like a monster. No, I said. I'm showing what happened. She shot to her feet, eyes blazing. You're pathetic, Joy. You always need to see yourself as the victim. Before that old familiar ache could climb into my throat, Marcus stepped forward, the same unhurried, steady pace. Enough, he said. She opened her mouth, ready to argue. He didn't let her. He met her stare, just like he had the night of the slap, and spoke the words that cut cleaner than any rage could get out. The room froze. My mother gasped. My father's jaw clenched. Marlene stood there, stuck somewhere between fury and shock. You can leave, Marcus added. We will. The balance of power shifted, so quietly it felt like a change in temperature. For the first time in my life, I watched my sister scan the room for someone to leap to her defense and find no one willing. She snatched up her purse, muttering under her breath, but her eyes never met mine. She didn't look at the folder. She didn't look at the evidence. She walked out without turning around. The door clicked softly behind her, a small sound carrying the weight of an ending. I let out a long, even breath, as if I'd been holding it for years. My mother spoke first, her voice unsteady. Joy, what happens now? Now. I closed the folder. The rest is already in motion, I said. And for once, it's not my responsibility to repair it. The house felt lighter after she left, even though nothing physical had changed. Same walls, same furniture, the same dim light seeping through the curtains. But the air no longer felt clogged with the need for someone else's approval. It was like the silence had finally chosen a different side. We drove home without talking. Rowan slept the entire ride, his small breaths fogging the edge of his blanket. Marcus kept one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting close to mine, not touching, just there, the way quiet support often is. I watched the city slide past outside, lights stretching into soft ribbons. Everything looked oddly ordinary, but I didn't feel ordinary at all. Back home, I carried Rowan out into the backyard. The winter sun slanted low over the grass, gentle enough not to sting, warm enough that the space didn't feel barren. I set him down near the patio, and he pulled himself up against the wooden bench legs, wobbling, pure, uncomplicated determination. He laughed, a small, bubbling new sound untouched by anyone else's expectations. I sat beside him and let the moment stretch, let it breathe. For years, I had mistaken silence for surrender. I had trained myself to step back, to round off my edges, to make myself easy so the family could stay whole. But standing there, watching Rowan balance on uncertain legs, I realized something simple and permanent. Silence only wounds you when it belongs to someone else. When it's yours, it turns into something else. A boundary, a starting point. The folder I'd closed at my parents' house lay on our kitchen counter, untouched. No ringing phones, no frantic texts, no apologies, just space, open, uncluttered, waiting. She never came back. The thought settled in without bitterness, without triumph, without grief. Just truth. A clean line where chaos used to stand. A light wind slipped through the yard, brushing Rowan's hair as he shifted his grip and took one small, shaky step toward me. I held my hands out, but I didn't pull him in. I let him find his own balance. In that stillness, something finally loosened, something I'd been carrying since childhood, shaped like a wooden chair at the far end of a long table. For the first time, the quiet felt like it belonged to me. The yard grew softer as the last of the daylight slid behind the fence, leaving only the hushed stir of winter grass. Rowan braced himself against the bench, looking at me with wide, unburdened eyes. I drew in the cold air and let it settle where fear used to sit. The past didn't disappear. but it no longer dictated the outline of my days. Families can shatter in loud explosions, but they also fracture in quiet ways. And sometimes that quiet is the first honest sound you ever hear. Boundaries aren't payback. They're the place where your own life finally starts. If you've ever lived through a silence like this, tell me what it taught you. Share the moment when everything shifted for you. I'm listening, and somewhere out there,